Hi, my name is Alka Aneja and I'm from On Track Realty. And with me, I have Iris Shimoni from NJ Lenders. Welcome back, Iris.
Thank you, Alka.
So, Iris, when we get a client and the client has bought a home, inspections have happened, and they apply for a mortgage with you, after that, we kind of we're done with the process. We've handed it over to the professionals, right? So, take us behind the scenes as to what happens with that.
Okay, so basically the steps of the mortgage process are as follows. The
Okay.
customer usually applies online,
Right. Okay.
and then a couple days later, they're going to get their loan disclosures emailed to them to DocuSign. And that's all the terms and conditions of the loans, right? So
Right.
that's step one, is sending them the loan disclosures. Step two is once they're done with their inspection and we know everything will be fine, we will then order their appraisal.
Okay.
Okay, so the appraisal usually gets ordered within 5 business days, and usually the appraiser will just tell us that the home is worth what they're paying for
Right.
it.
And we're the point of contact for that. So
Correct.
we'll be
Right.
Okay.
So once the appraisal is done,
Mhm.
it will then go into processing. Processing means that the processor will review all the documents
Mhm.
to make sure that we have everything that we need to get it ready for a loan approval.
Mhm.
So for example, we require 2 forms of ID. If someone just gave us one, we're going to reach out to them and say, hey, we need another ID.
Right.
Normally we need 2 pay stubs. If someone gave us only 1 pay stub,
Right.
then we're going to ask them for that.
So the more thorough the client is with the information you ask for, the less inquiries you have to keep going back.
100%. The more they give to me up front,
Right.
and the more detailed we can be, the
Right.
smoother the process will go. So for
Right.
example, if someone has a large deposit of $10,000 in their account that they got, let's say, from a friend,
Right.
we need to address that now because it will get flagged
Right.
to say, well, wait a second, what
Where
is
did
this?
yeah.
So the processor's job is to review the documents to make sure that the approval goes smoother.
Are you hands-on in this process?
Yeah, so I'm
Okay.
hands-on in collecting the documents. I
Okay.
also have a production assistant who will assist me with collecting documents, reviewing the documents,
Got it.
and then the processor will CC myself and my production partner the entire time, so we're familiar with what's going on.
Got it. Okay.
So once the processor sends let's say, a revised need list to your client,
Mhm.
and let's assume they give that back in a timely manner, the loan will then go to the underwriter for review for a mortgage approval.
Okay.
Now, you've heard of mortgage commitment, and maybe your buyer is not familiar with the commitment, but the only way to get a commitment in New Jersey is to have the appraisal done.
Right.
So when the appraisal is complete and we review the appraisal, and let's say the underwriter reviews the documents and everything looks okay,
Mhm.
we will issue you a mortgage commitment that is usually conditional.
Okay.
So some of the conditions could be you need to buy home insurance.
Right.
We need to see the title insurance from the attorney,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Or we need clarification on your employment history, just stuff like that.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
So once you have the mortgage commitment, we send a copy to the realtor
Right.
and we send a copy to the attorney.
Okay.
At that point in time, the attorney will generally order the title insurance.
Okay.
The title insurance, for the borrowers who are not familiar with it, it's basically insurance that if there's liens on the property after they close, they're not responsible.
It's to protect them.
Protect them and to
Yeah.
protect us as a lender.
Right,
So there's
right.
lender's title insurance and there's buyer's title insurance.
Right.
So at that point, your attorney will order the title, and then usually it could take about a week or so. Now, once the buyer provides whatever's on that conditional loan approval, and we have the title insurance, the home insurance, the loan will then go back to the underwriter for a final approval. And we've
Okay.
all heard the term clear to close.
Close.
That means that everything is done.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So when the buyer gets a clear to close, generally how many days before closing does that happen? Does it?
So it depends on the buyer. It
Okay.
depends if they're good about giving the documents up front.
Okay.
A clear to close could be 4 days before closing, could be 2 weeks before closing. It all
Okay.
depends on how quickly the attorney will get us the title, how quickly will you get us the home insurance. So that's why my production partner and myself try to have you understand that the sooner you get us the documents,
Right.
the better off you'll be, and you can get clear to close.
Got it.
Now, once you're clear to close, it then goes to a quality control process to
Okay.
make sure that no one missed anything.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so once you're clear to close and your QC's done, generally that next step is you'll get a call from the attorney saying, okay, the closing date is, let's say, on this day, and that buyer needs to bring bank certified funds for the closing. And that's when they'll bring their money to closing.
Right.
Now, one important step is 3 days before you actually go to closing, that buyer will get a form called the closing disclosure form.
That's right.
Okay, they must acknowledge this form that has all the closing costs,
Yes.
and a lot of times it's still estimated, it's not final cost,
Right.
where they have to acknowledge 3 business days before they actually close.
Okay.
If they don't acknowledge that, that could actually delay their closing.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm sure you said that you also informed that
Yes.
buyer to look out for that form.
Yes.
So once that initial closing disclosure form goes out,
Yeah.
sometimes it's a day or two before closing where you have the final numbers. Because
Okay.
we're working back and forth. Our closing department is working directly with the title company, and we're going back and forth to make sure that the numbers are correct.
Okay. So when is the employment check that's happening? Is that happening again 24 hours before the closing?
So that's a great question. So 10 days before you close, at any point in time, the lender will call your employer to make sure that you're still working there.
Right.
And there have been instances where a consumer didn't tell the lender that they changed jobs, and there was a problem. We had to then delay the closing to get the new job on the loan application and verify that job.
Got it.
So in the middle of a process for a mortgage, you never want to change jobs, especially without telling the loan officer, because you can change jobs. You just have to make sure it's the appropriate time.
Right. Right. Okay.
So,
but it's not. Is the inquiry happening 24 hours before, or is it happening anywhere within the 10 days and 24 hours?
It can be between 10 days and 24 hours,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
So not every time it's going to be the day before closing.
Okay.
It can be 5 days, it could be 10 days.
Okay.
But there's that window that, depending on the processor, they will call to see if you're still working there.
Okay. Because that's someplace I've seen them as the delay. That's the delay that I've seen a lot of times, is that they're waiting till the last minute to do employment verifications, and then they can't reach HR or they can't reach someone, and then they're like, well, we're clear to close, but we can't close.
Yeah, you're right. So sometimes it's a problem, because what we do up front is we try and ask the borrower to get the right information. Who's your HR contact? Because we're going to need to call them and verify it. And sometimes that buyer doesn't really know, and we have to do our own homework to try and figure it out. But we've emailed a couple of times with no response. So that's why a lender, if they don't get the right person, it can delay because of that. Because unfortunately, you are doing it last minute.
Right.
Okay, now sometimes it's too last minute. The lender should really have done it beforehand, right? And at that point, they know who they're calling. But that's definitely common in our industry, where sometimes a lender does wait last minute. All of a sudden, they can't find the right person.
That's right.
And then you're scrounging around.
Yeah. So that can happen, and the buyers need to be aware of that, and need to, maybe go to if it's a small company, go to their HR person and say, hey, have you gotten the call? Because you haven't, expect it. It's going to happen.
Correct.
Right? And that's something where they can proactively take that role also, to make sure that it's expected, or call the mortgage reps. Because everybody's a team with the same goal.
Correct. We all want the buyer to go to closing on time, and that's where the realtor, the attorney, the title company, the lender, home insurance, that's where we're all working together for this buyer to make sure that it's a smooth process and they get to the closing table on time. But as you know, the contract is always on or about, and sometimes there's unforeseen issues that come up. And that's what I always try and explain to the buyer, that as much as it's our number one goal to close on time, you don't know what can happen, and you have to realize that you could be delayed 1 or 2 days, and you just need to be prepared for that if it does happen.
Yeah. So for your mortgage companies and your mortgage, moving companies, right? You're moving the movers. People are like, well, when do I schedule my movers? I don't know. They're asking for a date. We don't know until the file's clear to close, and until everything is all set as to when the closing will be, because it's not always the date on the contract. We're gearing towards that date.
Right. It's called tentative.
It's tentative
date.
Yes.
Right. And I always tell the buyer, assume you will close that day, and you could schedule your movers, but understanding if something comes up, you may have to cancel. And again, it can be a stressful process. The mortgage process for your well-qualified buyer is actually one of the most stressful processes, but it's our job to walk them through the process to make it as least stressful as possible. And that's the difference between one lender to the next.
Exactly.
Is that I'm here to guide them the entire way from start to finish. And you don't get that with, let's say, an online lender.
That's
right? Like I'm in the neighborhood, I live in the neighborhood, and there's something to being local. that makes the process go smoother.
Yeah, and we always tell our clients, do not wait till the day of your end of your lease. Some people the lease is ending the 30th of the month and they're wanting the closing on the 29th. I'm like, please don't do that. Keep a buffer because you don't want to close that day. Like, what if the closing gets delayed? You'll be out of your home, right? Keep the closing 26 so you have a 4-day buffer of.
Right. And look, sometimes you just don't have that choice. And when
Right.
we all want to try and coordinate the timing as perfect as possible,
Right.
but things pop up and that buyer may have to pay another month's rent
Yeah.
if the timing doesn't work out. So I always like to tell the buyer, your closing date is on or about, and things can come up that you don't expect, and you need to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah.
But that's why it's important for the buyer to be on top of their game when it comes to mortgage wise, because the sooner you get everything done,
Yes.
the less stressful the process is, because
Absolutely.
the mortgage process is just one part of this. They have the moving, registering their kids in school if they have children, the utility bills. There's just so much to this
Yeah.
process.
It's called joys of homeownership. Let's not call it a process like that.
Okay, fine.
It's not
Yes.
a tedious thing. It's a happy thing.
It is a happy thing, but it could
Yeah.
be overwhelming.
Yes, it
and
is
our
definitely
job
overwhelming.
is to make it
Yes.
not overwhelming
Yes.
for our clients.
Yes, and when you have a professional team, that's what makes it easier, right? It's going to a new doctor versus an experienced doctor will prevent you from pitfalls. You may never know that happened. You may not even know it because we're covering for you in the beginning, and they'll not know because the road is kind of paved for them with having people who have experience.
Right, and the buyer doesn't realize how much behind the scenes there
Yeah.
are between you and me and the attorney.
Yeah.
There's all this coordination going on that they don't even know about, but that's our job, is to have them be happy and smiling,
Exactly.
and we take care of everything.
That's right. That's where they get 20 and 25 years of experience.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right.
Then with that, thank you, Rez. Thank you for joining us.
My
And
pleasure.
Thank you for all the information. So we've given you a lot of information today, and if there's anything that we can clear up for you, or if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. We're here for you, and we're here to make this process seamless for you. Thank you for trusting us with your biggest purchase.